Welcome back. This is the 13th episode of the Painted Privacy video series, and I'm the artificial avatar of Luca Bolognini, European data lawyer and essayist. In this episode, we'll talk about symbols, good negativity, and law and transparency, a contrario. To help me in this reflection, I am borrowing the title of a famous Italian song by Francesco Guccini, Quello che non. The title of this song means just what is not. I am twisting its meaning to my purpose, however, as I do not want to speak of nihilism or existential crises, but rather of well-intentioned omissions, of healthy selections, divisions, absences, and abstentions that sometimes turn out to be providential. About 30 years ago, I remember visiting the new home of one of my uncles, a lawyer, incidentally, and being struck by something peculiar. Hanging on the walls of his living room were some empty antique picture frames, with no painting, drawing, or engraving inside. It was not clear then whether this was a deliberate choice or whether it was just temporary, due to hesitancy about which paintings to put where, or planned delays. Was it a stroke of genius or practical necessity, a symbolic decision or a shortage of ideas? I will not reveal to you the answer, which time, that same old tyrannical and therapeutic time, would later reveal to me. Instead, I want to observe those empty frames and ponder the deliberate omissions, or, in a play on words, the positivity of the negative. Symbols are central to this line of thinking. The term symbol derives from the Greek symbolon, that which is thrown or cast together, or distinguishing mark, in turn derived from the verb symballo, put together, make coincide. The symbolon was a mark of recognition, of distinction, made up of each of the two parts obtained from irregularly splitting an object in two, for example, a piece of wood, which the descendants of different families kept as a sign of reciprocal friendship. Each family possessed one piece without the other half, and vice versa. Each fragment, insufficient and partial in and of itself, had at least two levels of metaphorical meaning. The first related to the missing element, which could be imagined, desired, sought, and so on. The second related to the overall meaning, that missing piece and that potential for reintegration represented the indivisible bond between human beings. The symbol does not tell us everything but allows us to understand it through the absence of the rest. The symbol inevitably carries with it and within it a deficiency, and the deficiency evokes, legitimizes, and stimulates the ideal, emotional, rational space of the other. The Neoplatonic non finito, unfinished technique, well known among the great Renaissance sculptors as well as among the pre-modern naturalists of the 19th century, was linked to this intuition. Here on the right, you can admire a detail of the Bandini Pietà, deliberately left unfinished by Michelangelo. A number of 20th century writers, from Ernest Hemingway to Raymond Carver and Italo Calvino, have theorized and practiced selection and writing as taking away, excess, surplus, weight, and details. Hemingway, with his iceberg theory, argued that 7/8 of every visible part of the story must remain submerged, non-verbalized. Only 1/8 should appear as words on the page, but, careful, the writer must know all 8/8 perfectly, so that the omission is entirely deliberate and conscious. Otherwise, if the author is unaware, the whole story is weakened and the gaps become noticeable. Carver clipped and pruned phrases and paragraphs obsessively with the help of his editor Lish, and created minimalist stories where the reader was left to imagine what lay beneath, both emotionally and factually. His style was negative, literally, and steeped in descriptions a contrario or by exclusion and contrast. He narrated quello che non, what was not. While we read, Carver allows us the leeway to occupy and define reality in our own minds, with our voices and our eyes. He does not tell us how things are, or not too much at least. He mostly tells us how things are not. The houses were not too close. Someone did not feel like talking. A child did not cry. An object did not have certain characteristics. The rest is up to us. Minimalism is symbolic. Silence is symbolic, also in music. There are even contemporary artists, like Maurizio Cattelan, who have made invisibility, and the absence of the work, a work itself. There are times when the omission regards details and not the object in its entirety, and then the work appears incomplete, deliberately unfinished. This is the case with the unfinished Bandini Pietà by Michelangelo, mentioned before, but also, on the theme of symbolic epiphanies, with Leonardo da Vinci's Adoration of the Magi, which he left maliciously unresolved for all eternity after he moved to Milan. You can see it in the upper left corner above the empty frames. We can fantasize about its final colors and features, like children engrossed in a coloring book. Was this perhaps a Leonardesque symbol to express, shout, decry, his deep yearning to remain in Florence, to leave a bridge open for his return? Incompleteness as a blatant omission of information is also a theme in the stories depicted. Going by the legend and the gospel according to Matthew, the Magi did not respect their pledge to Herod, making a highly metaphorical choice when they decided not to report to the king the exact whereabouts of Jesus' stable in Bethlehem. In that legal system of 2,000 years ago, it was probably a crime of omission, but that is beside the point. We are not interested in the fulfillment of legal obligations. The information filter is what counts. What is not said by the Magi has dramatic consequences, for better or worse, salvation for Jesus and his family, who flee to Egypt, but also the slaughter of the innocents, boys under 2 years old, by order of the cruel king of Judea, insensitive and incapable of understanding symbols and what is not spoken, and therefore of finding his bearings. Now, what is missing in these considerations is the second part of the symbol, the allegorical parallel between the selection omission, the breaking off and lack of the rest of the information, and its meaning in the legal dimension. If I were courageous and trusting, I would stop here and leave the rest up to you. I would leave the frames empty. But I am a mistrustful lawyer who deals in compliance and risk prevention. I cannot help it. I need to settle and cross off a series of points. I promise to keep it short, and to that end I will cling on to a numbered list as if it were a string of floating buoys. First point. The submerged seventh-eighths of the facts and reasons of law, which we know perfectly well but do not write down in a legal deed or memo, do not constitute deceitful, fraudulent, or misleading silences or omissions. They are meant to and can be inferred, just as Hemingway intended. Less is often more, and the reader, the authority, judge, or counterparty, does not usually appreciate documents that are overly wordy, long-winded, and convoluted. It is true that deceit lies more in the eyes of the reader, and symbolic minimalism could put us at risk of spurious criticism. Second point. I would like to apply the iceberg principle to Articles 13 and 14 of the GDPR in relation to privacy information. In those articles, the European legislator provides for an exemption whereby certain mandatory content can be omitted and therefore not included in the information policy, provided and to the extent that the information is already available to the data subject, the reader. How do we demonstrate that availability, where it is submerged, unconscious, not explicit, and above all, based on the perspicacity and sensitivity of the data subject? How much trust do we need to place in the reader? Carver and Hemingway's trust, or Joyce and Proust's mistrust, if that is indeed what their painstaking meticulousness denotes. Third point. Paradoxically, it makes a lot of sense to reserve some space in legal texts for negation and emphasis, a contrario. Specifying what does not correspond to the relevant conduct is useful and helps to clarify. Let's take a leaf out of Carver's book. Let's describe what is not relevant to or what does not have anything to do with the case in question in order to rule it out categorically. Good contract writers include this type of content and exemplification in clauses to make the meaning of the agreements unequivocal. I would like to try this technique in a privacy policy or a warning about online profiling, in compliance with the new European Digital Services Act. Fourth point, omission may even be a duty or equivalent to exercising a right to defend oneself, for example. In responding to a personal data access request, we must be careful to avoid producing information that infringes upon the rights and freedoms of others, first and foremost, by obscuring any information relating to third parties other than the data subject. Furthermore, we are not required to disclose data, mainly related to assessments, such as surveys and opinions, that would prejudice any legal proceedings or claims the data controller may be involved in. This is provided for by Article 2 Undecise of the Italian Privacy Code, with several allusions whose meanings are filled in by law and doctrine. Fifth and last point, each omissus is a symbol and offers us a creative opportunity to imagine the missing parts. In a play on an old advertising slogan for famous Italian chocolates with love messages, an omissus. What do you want to tell me? Thanks for following this 13th episode of Painted Privacy, and see you next time with Luca Bolognini's artificial avatar.